Yo, how's it going, guys? My name is Feedaboi. I am a challenger Kled main on North America that peaked at 900 LP last season. I unfortunately ended GM by literally like a game, so I didn't get the challenger ending to the season, which is pretty unfortunate, but you know, it happens. Either way, though, I'm here today to bring you guys the Season 13 Kled guide for the best runes and items going into the season, in my opinion. So yeah, enough rambling about myself, and let's get right into it. So we're gonna start off with the runes. There's 3 different pages that I think are the best right now for Kled going into the season. I'm gonna start off with top lane. This is the most standard page I've been running most games, which is Conquer with the sorcery tree. It gives the best damage and scaling you can possibly have in a page. And yeah, for the keystone, I personally always run Conquer top lane. The only time I'll ever not run Conquer is if I'm against like a range matchup or like a super squishy matchup, while the rest of our team also is like pretty squishy. Then sometimes I run PTA. But overall, I feel like Conquer usually just gives the most value, because most bruiser and just matchups in top lane in general tend to have pretty like high base armor just because of their bruisers. So Conquer just gives you more value than PTA throughout the majority of laning phase. PTA will outdamage it probably for the first like 5-6 levels. But after the first back goes off and they start to build some armor, PTA just slowly starts to fall off. So that's why I usually always just run Conquer. It just feels better and gives more consistency. Obviously, for the second part of the tree, you always just run Triumph, because Presence of Mind doesn't work on Kled and you don't build enough lifesteal to want to go overheal. And then for the legend trees, I usually go Alacrity most games unless they have like 2 or more like heavy CC champions. Then I'll go Tenacity. Tenacity actually is getting nerfed next patch as well, so it's gonna feel a little bit worse than it has in previous patches, but I still think Tenacity can be good if they have a lot of CC. And then for the last part of the tree, I usually run Last Stand every game. The only time I will think about maybe running Last or Coup de Grace over Last Stand is if they have like 2 or more executes on their team. Since for the most part, Last Stand just gives a ton of value, because it's once you're below 60%, so even before you're even dismounted, you're gonna start to get some bonus damage from Last Stand. Then obviously once you're below 30%, which is when you are dismounted, you just get a lot of extra like free damage, which basically like makes up for the damage you're losing on Kled's dismount passive anyways, where you only do 70% of... I can't remember if 70, I'm pretty sure it's 70% of your normal damage. It might have been 80 though. I always mess up those numbers. Either way though, it helps with the damage debuff you get when you're dismounted. And yeah, it's just the most consistent, because obviously you can't run cut down because you already have so much health on Kled with your double like 2 HP bars. So yeah, usually I'll just run Conquer, Triumph, Alacrity, Last Stand. And then for sorcery, always go Transcendence if you're running sorcery. It's the best like part of the trio, because Kled obviously has really high CDs, so getting the extra haste early on is really important. And just in general, Transcendence is just a really good rune. And then for the second one, you can run Nullifying if you're against like an AP matchup. You can even run Nimbus if you want, but I usually have the most consistency with just running Gathering, especially when you're in lower elo games too, where the games tend to last 30+ minutes. Gathering Storms gives so much like AD for free. Like 29 AD at 30 minutes is pretty insane. That's what, literally like almost a full BF sword. That's like probably like 900 gold. That's a 3 long sword. So yeah, it would literally be like what, 1050 for free. And obviously Kled just scales really well with flat damage, so yeah, it just feels really good. So yeah, this is the page I usually run most games. I always go double adaptive. I know some people like running attack speed. I don't think it's like terrible to run attack speed. I usually just prefer to go double adaptive, because Kled obviously scales really well with just flat adaptive damage on all his abilities. So yeah, and then obviously just go armor and MR depending on the matchup. I don't think health is that great on Kled, because he already has like pretty low base resistances compared to most champions. So I usually always just tend to go either armor and MR depending on the matchup. And now moving on to the more laning focused page, it's Resolve. If you go in Resolve, I usually always just go Demolish, because it synergizes really well with Kled, because it's based off max HP. And obviously you have a ton of max HP on Kled. Even if you aren't even actually building HP, you're still going to have a lot of value from it. So I usually always run Demolish. And then usually I'll run Second Wind just because bone plating is kind of trash ever since I nerfed it. Conditioning also doesn't really do much for you. And then the rest of these are also like, I mean, unflinching can be good in some games. Like, instead of sometimes if you don't want to run tenacity, you can always run unflinching instead and do like something like this. If you want to be a little bit more greedy. But yeah, usually I just run Second Wind since obviously it just free sustain, and also it just synergizes nicely with Kled because it's based off your missing health. So when you're dismounted, especially into like lanes like Darius, for example, with this bleed, you're going to be regenerating a ton of health back, and you'll almost always be full HP while you're dismounted, having Second Wind. So yeah, that's basically it for the top lane pages. I wouldn't really recommend going Domination or Inspiration top lane. I think Inspiration just in general is a really free to run. Domination, I know some people like running it, but I feel like it's too greedy to run top lane because, as I mentioned, most top laners will have a lot of base stats already, like base armor and more. Yeah, base armor. So going Sudden Impact's kind of trash for top lane, and then all the hunters are like kind of whatever. But speaking on that though, when I go mid lane, I actually do run the Domination tree secondary, and I run PTA instead of Conquer. This is because most mid laners actually have low base armor because they're mages or like the melees like Yasuo, Yone, and they just have a lot less base armor. So having PTA can actually have a lot of value in those lanes because you can 100 to 0 them at level 3-4 if they're not expecting it and they just overextend for no reason. So I tend to always run PTA, and I always run this page just in general actually, with going Sun Impact as well in my secondary tree, as I mentioned. Since they are very squishy and have very low base armor, Sun Impact actually does have a lot of value with PTA, gaining the extra burst of lethality early on. The extra 9 lethality is actually pretty insane against champions like, say, like a Lux, for example, who only has like 28 base armor or whatever it is. That's pretty low. So you can end up just literally 100 to 0ing at level 3-4 if they don't respect it with Ignite. And then I run Treasure Hunter with it because when you're mid lane, you're tend to roam a ton, right? Because mid lane, unlike top lane, you have 2 lanes you can roam to. You're not just stuck on an island. So getting the Treasure Hunter for the extra bit of snowball potential is really nice. You could also run Eyeball instead, or even, I guess, Relentless. I don't think Relentless is as good. I know some people even like running Ingenious. If you go Prowlers, like you could also do something like this. I just personally like having the extra gold on takedowns because it just gets you quicker to your Ravenous Spike and just any of your items in general, which I'm going to go onto in a second with the itemization, but it just feels really nice on Kled, especially because obviously Kled is an early game focused champion. So getting the extra bit of gold bundled into you early on is really, really nice. But yeah, the rest of the tree doesn't really change for precision other than just having PTA. It just depends, obviously, if the tenacity or alacrity, depending on how much CC they have, and then same with the PD tree. But yeah, this tree has been working out really well for me. I actually have an account during preseason with like, I think it's like 27-3 in like GM Challenger now. It started off in like D1 MMR, but yeah, I climbed it up really hard with like a 96% win rate playing Kled mid exclusively. So at this page, it actually works really, really well, and I definitely recommend trying it out in your games. But yeah, that's basically it for the trees for runes. Now we're going to move on to the itemization. So going into this season, always rush Ravenous Hydra, trust me. I know some people are like, no, I want to go Bork, I want to go my Mythic, blah, blah, blah. Trust me, Ravenous Hydra is literally just the best item you can build. This item is not balanced. It gives 85 AD at max stacks, 20 haste, 10% omnivamp, and obviously the AoE damage. They have nerfed this item like twice, 2 or 3 times, but all they've done is nerf the actual AoE damage. So it doesn't actually make the item like any worse than it already was. Like, it's still really, really strong just because of how much AD the item gives. And as I mentioned earlier, Kled just snowballs really, really well, or like synergizes really, really well with flat damage. So getting 85 AD on an item is just absolutely absurd. And if you can end up getting this item like anywhere within the first like 10-12 minutes of the game, you will literally just pop off and start like one-shotting your laner if you're not behind. And then for Mythics, a lot of people have been asking me, why don't you go Gore Drinker? Why don't you go Jacksha? Why don't you go all these beefy Mythics? But in my opinion, all these Mythics just are trash in this meta for Kled. because there's so much max HP damage, current HP damage, just damage in general in the game. Now building extra like HP on items like Gore Drinker, on Jack Show, all those items, like, yes, I know the argument is, oh, I want to be tankier, but it actually doesn't make you tankier if you think about it, because if they have Bork, for example, or Divine, or just any of those max HP items, it actually makes it so they're going to do more damage than you, especially when you're dismounted. So it's actually a negative to build it. And also just in general, the base stats on those items just aren't good. You just don't do enough damage. And they're actually nerfing Jack Show on the patch, so Jack Show's actually not even going to be viable at all anymore, I don't think, on Kled, because they're changing it to so it's only bonus health. So I would never go beefy Mythics anymore, honestly. I recommend always just going either Eclipse or Prowlers. I think Eclipse is actually the more consistent out of the two right now. I've been running Eclipse more than Prowlers. I only really run Prowlers until like really squishy comps, or if I'm like really far ahead. But pairing up these lethality Mythics with Ravenous just gives you disgusting 2-item spike damage. Like you can literally 100-0 almost any champion in the mid game, as long as they aren't just stacking armor. It's really insane, especially for mid lane, as I mentioned, because I actually have been preferring mid lane over top lane, just because obviously top lane the matchups aren't as good. So running this 2-item setup is really strong. And speaking of that, my 3-item core is obviously Ravenous into one of the lethality Mythics, which is usually Eclipse. But then I've actually been running Grudge third. For a while in the beginning of the preseason, I was actually running Cleaver over Grudge. I was like, oh, Cleaver just gives really nice base stats. But after like thinking about it for a while, if you're going to be committing to this damage build, I feel like getting just flat pen rather than having to build it up with the cleave on Cleaver just feels better. So having the flat 30% and on Grudge just feels a lot better than having to build up the Cleaver stacks. Obviously, you can still run Cleaver over Grudge if you really prefer to, but this 3-item spike for damage is just so insane. Like, if you guys have been watching some of the YouTube videos I've been posting during preseason, I've literally been able to like one-shot like 3 people like within like the first like 7-8 seconds of a fight, because of how just strong this 3-item spike is, especially against like carries like ADCs, mages, all those champions that aren't going to stack armor. You will just melt through them with these 3 items. And also a lot of top laners actually, if you're ahead with these items, unlike previous seasons, you can actually just 1v1 them in side lane and pressure sides as well, because you just have so much burst on them and they won't be able to actually stay with you in the 1v1. Now moving on to the actual build. So obviously it's the first 3 core items with your boots, depending on what you're against. A lot of AD champions just go steel caps, a lot of AP or just CC champions, you can go mercs. You can also go Lucidity boots if you're really far ahead, if you want to be really greedy, but I usually recommend just to go defensive boots. But yeah, you go with those 3 items with your boots, and then usually I'll just go mod DD unless enemy comps are like really heavy AP or really heavy AD. Like say they have like 3 crit users, then I'll go Randuin's instead, which brings me down to my situational items, where yeah, it literally just depends. Like you can substitute some of these items whenever you want, but usually I'll always just go with these 3 items first. And then yeah, 4th, 5th items are pretty interchangeable. This is just, yeah, as I mentioned, just a build you could go off of. It usually works most games, but some games you'll have to swap out things like Serpents if they have a lot of shielding. If you want even more burst, you can even go like a Yomu's, for example. As I mentioned, if they have a lot of crit users, you can go Randuin's. If they are just heavy AD and you want more armor, you could also just go a GA. Only time I'll ever go Bork is if they have like 2 or 3 like Giga HP stackers, like with Heartsteel and stuff like that, and I'll go as like a 4th item. I personally don't like Bork at all on Kled. I feel like it's a pretty like whatever item, because the actual base stats are pretty trash. Obviously, the item is like really OP in general, because like 12% current health damage is pretty insane, but I don't know, I just feel like getting percent pen is usually just better. So I usually don't prefer to go in unless like they have a ton of like HP stackers. And then obviously I was talking about Cleaver earlier. And then there's also Hullbreaker as well if you're like really far ahead in the side lane and you know they're not gonna be able to contest you, so you can just roll them over inside. Either way though, yeah, there's not too much more to the builds, I'd say. This is usually what I've been running. I've been running lethality and stuff like that. I personally think the tank mythics are pretty trash. and Gore Drinker also just feels really bad. I haven't tried Stridebreaker at all, but I'm pretty sure Stridebreaker is the same as Gore, where it's like you're building a lot of HP and the actual stats on the item aren't that strong, so I just don't think it's like that worth the run. So I'd recommend definitely trying out a build like this and letting me know down below how it's feeling. But yeah, overall, this is pretty much it for me. Actually, a little bit of a shorter video than I thought it was gonna be, but I think I've gotten most of what I've wanted to say. But yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning into the video. I hope this did help you guys. As I mentioned, let me know down below if you guys do have some creative builds I could maybe try out during the season. And yeah, I appreciate you guys. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out, boys.